Okay, so I got two Twitter handles. This one's better, right? At Jason S. if you're going to tweet. Okay, so I want to give you guys a personal journey. I'm going to take you through a bunch of the companies that I've been involved with as either a startup founder or early employee, and I try to pull out like one lesson for each of them. There's a lot of learning, some successes, some failures, and but I'll try and keep it to one lesson for each. The first one actually is a lesson that I learned from a fellow founder. This is for a company called 1-800-GOT-JUNK. You guys might have heard of it. Back when I was with them, it was like a summer job post-university graduation, and it was like two guys in a pickup truck, right? Like that's the stage that it was at. And the lesson that Brian taught me there was the shortest path to be. Always take the shortest path to be. Now, it seems trite, it seems obvious, but let me give you a story about how that thought process came to be. I was sitting with him over lunch one day, and we were looking at an expansion, looking at bins instead of just trucks, leaving bins outside of construction places and what have you. And so we knew nothing about that space, and we're chewing away on our Subway sandwiches and thinking, maybe we could do this. And of course, I've got my business school mindset going, all right, well, we got to think about a business plan, look at the market, think about competitors, what could it be? While I'm thinking of that and chewing on my sandwich, Brian's already grabbed a directory and looked up whoever the biggest bin company is, called the 1-800 number, got a hold of the CEO, and booked a meeting, right? So in 5 minutes, he took a shortcut that I would have been thinking about forever. So it was like the first lesson of saying, don't hesitate. Where's the shortest path to be? Take it. So that was a good learning from Brian. Then I went into my first company, which was Columbus Group. So this was a web applications company, interactive agency, back in the Netscape era. So we were building websites for companies that frankly didn't even have them way back when. And it was a great success early in the game. Grew to about 100 people. We did get acquired. Fantastic. But if I was to go back and actually talk to my 22-year-old self when I did this company, I would say think bigger. We were super excited about getting BC Hydro as a client. We were super excited about local companies as a client. But at the time, there was greenfield everywhere. We should have been thinking south, maybe even Europe. There's a problem that I find that I had with not knowing that you could actually do that. There's a sense of this border being impenetrable, and it's not. Calling Verizon, calling Disney, calling Apple is the same thing as calling BC Hydro. And so a big learning for me, if I went back and I applied this when I started at Vision Critical, was to plant your flag in as many places as possible and just think way bigger. So that was my Columbus Group learning. Baizu was my next thing. This was an ill-fated startup that I did with a couple Harvard MBAs. It was down in SF. And this was group buying. And my learning on this one was timing. So I think Arv mentioned that. And the timing piece was really interesting. So we were trying to create a site that enabled you and all your friends to go buy some goods cheaper, because we would take your aggregated committed demand and present it to suppliers and say, look, we got 50 people, we got 100 people that want to buy this thing, give them a deal. So it sounds awesome, but the timing was way off. This was pre-social graph. Facebook was just getting rolling. LinkedIn was just getting rolling. So to amass even 50 people was a challenge. Like you had to email them, you had to call them, or you had to spend a whack-a-dough to get a whole bunch of strangers together to buy that stuff. So the timing was completely off. It was one of the many reasons why it failed, but that was a big one and a lesson that I want you guys all to learn. Look at all of the trends that are dovetailing together and ask yourself if this is the right time to do it. In my current business, we're looking at, okay, machine learning's hot. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we can do to crack that. There's APIs that roll up a whole bunch of data. We can leverage that. The competition's increasing. We can leverage that. So there's a whole bunch of trends that made me think now is the time to embrace my existing company. I encourage you guys to do the same. So Gaia was another startup that we did some learning. This one was a case where you had experts in a category where we didn't know much. So a bit like Nat, where she's coming into an industry and she didn't understand it completely. We were trying to create a sports apparel company, an e-commerce direct-to-consumer play. For those ultimate Frisbee players in the world, you might remember this. And we didn't know a lot about apparel. And so we had all these suppliers offshore that we were working with, and they worked with Nike and they worked with Adidas. And of course, they had decades of experience, and they were giving us all sorts of advice that we were chewing on and listening to and taking in, thinking, well, they know better than we do. They've been in this space for a long time. And so it ended up shaping our thinking, and I think in an ill-fated way. We went down direction, expanded our product line far too quickly, not something that a small startup could take on. So the learning there was, you're the expert. You know, peel back the layers of the onion yourself. Think of it as one data point. Experts are great to listen to, but it's one data point of many. You're the one that's going to peel back the onion and think about your business most. The next one was Vision Critical. So I joined this company when it was 8 people. It was an early stage startup. I ran sales and marketing initially, became president after 30 months, had lots of great learnings in this business. It's a good success in town. I left it when it was about 500 people. So the learning that I wanted to share there, though, was the power of sales. So this is something, as a product guy, I came into the company thinking, well, products sell themselves. And many of you might be technical people, and you might think that it's bullshit. It's sales that really sells. So particularly in the B2B category, which was the place that Vision Critical was playing in, you obviously have to have a fantastic product. I'm not denying that. But when you have a fantastic sales team that can create the vision, conceptualize it in a very interesting way, and endure or enamor a particular client with that vision, they buy it. And when they buy it, that's a case study, and then the next person buys it, and it rolls from there. So my learning from Vision Critical was, don't run from sales, embrace it, learn it. I myself did a whole bunch of cold calling, and it was so humbling to get denied and told to get lost by people that were half your age, barely new in their jobs, but you realize that they didn't care if it was Obama on the other end of the phone. They were going to hang up on you in 30 seconds. So sales was a huge learning at Vision Critical that I applied into the next level of business. Actually, one more point on the sales thing. There's different types and different levels of salespeople that you want to consider. In the very early days, look for the jazz dancers. And by that I mean it's the people that can actually maneuver really well. They're not military precision Salesforce trained people yet. They're jazz dancers. They move and they shape and they bring back stuff to the product team, and they're thinking in a holistic way around it. As you progress and you get more clients and your business becomes more mature, that's when you're layering in more professional salespeople. So don't run out and hire a bunch of IBM people or Salesforce people and blow all your money on that. Look for the jazz dancers early and then bring the military precision in later. So Klue's my latest company. So we're happy about the round of financing, and it comes on the heels of what I call kind of the step function to building startups. So when I thought about the lesson that I could share with you in Klue, we're still relatively early. There's like probably a million lessons I could bring up, but the one that I wanted to talk about was just how I now think of building this type of startup, which is a venture-backed, non-bootstrapped, got to go big startup. And it's a step function, and it's not something that I thought about before. I thought the startup was kind of more of a linear curve. It's really a step function, and by that I mean you've got an elevator that you're going to take at one end of the milestone, or you got a cliff. And you want to set those yourself, or they'll be set upon you. So there's a handful of things that you want to think about where if you don't pass this milestone, you might want to think of shutting it down. And then there's a whole bunch of externalities where if you don't pass that milestone, you're going to have to shut down. You don't have the money. So either way, you need to look at the elevator and the cliff. And so a couple examples for the Klue world, like my vision for Klue initially was incubated while I was at Vision Critical. It was a problem that I had there. I talked to a couple other folks, and it seemed like it was a real problem. But the first step for me was, do I love this? Is this something that I really want to do for a while? Does it tug at you versus you poking at it? So that was the first milestone that I had to cross. The second milestone, where I took the elevator up, was 100 coffee meetings. And I call that the 100 coffee meeting with smart people that are going to beat the crap out of your idea. And if it withstands that, you're taking the elevator up to the next level. If it doesn't, shut it down, jump off the cliff. The next piece for us was building enough of a prototype. And actually, sorry, I'll back up. The next piece for me as a business founder was finding my technical co-founder. And I believe that you really need to have both halves to really have a great company. So for me to go and convince somebody that was extremely talented in the technical world, that could build whatever they wanted, get whatever job they wanted, and convince them of this vision, have them buy into it, share that vision, and be excited about it, and somebody who wants to code, yet at the same time could actually manage a team, is incredibly challenging. So I managed to get that, thankfully, so I'm taking the elevator up to the next ride. Then it's a prototype. Then it's talking to people and saying, hey, I've got this idea, we've got this team, we've got this prototype. Can you give us a little bit of money to get going? So I have a little bit of a background, so the angel money was easier for me to raise because I've done something before. I do believe it's either traction or you've got a reputation. There's no in between from raising money. So in my case, I was able to raise a little money and get the angel going, and then that meant building the prototype into a real product and then finding the next set of clients. And then you're on the next step. And so each of these are milestones where you were going to run out of that angel money, and unless I raised more funding, we were going to go off the cliff. So we managed to raise a little more funding because we got a little more client traction, and now we have a couple years of runway before we get to the next cliff or elevator. So that's how I now think of startups. They are stages, they are milestones that you're going to have to walk through and make a cold, hard decision, whether it's forced on you or whether it's your choice, about going up the elevator or going down the cliff. Okay, that's it. I like the closing. Okay, good.
Any questions? Oh, yeah, Jay, if you want to come to the front.
Jason, thank you. You're the perfect guy for the reason I came here today. I like to start new things, keep it going. Now it needs to move to stage 2. Now I'm looking for something new again. I have that problem. You have gone through so many of these. So the first question is, how did you keep yourself focused? That's number 1. Number 2 is where I am today. Money is not my driver anymore. So I came here to see if I can find people who have non-material purpose in life. So I'm at the stage where I'm looking for a non-material purpose in my life. There are a lot of things we can do. So what drives you to keep doing this? Because it's not the material part at the end of the day. And I'm realizing that because I have worked for Activision and many other companies, and so been there on that technology side. It's not technology, it's not title, it's not money. There is something else that satisfies. How have you been able to do that? Same with you, Nat, and all of you guys. Teachable points, please. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think they're interrelated. You know, focus and drive is really what you're getting at, and so part of it, I think, is built into the personality. So for me personally, I'm a binary state kind of guy. I'm driven in whatever it is I do. So, you know, as a completely personal example, with Alex, like I left Vision Critical to buy 4 round-the-world plane tickets and travel for a year because I needed to focus on my family for a year. I couldn't do that while building a business because I'm more binary. Other people can actually manage that. I'm kind of binary that way. So part of it is a nature thing. I'm just driven to actually get into whatever I'm doing and focus on a fairly linear way on that. The motivation is an interesting one. So I consider this a lot. When I looked at now my 5th startup, I didn't need to do this, but I was driven by the build. I love the build. Right? So it's never the money, it's always the build. So it always starts with a problem that nags at you. You're looking at this problem and going, why is no one doing this? There must be a reason why no one's doing this, and everybody's doing pieces of it. So that's when I look at the why now. That's when I look at the trends and say, okay, well, there's new things that are happening that are going to shape this problem differently. And I can attack it from that perspective. And then you get more and more interested in that idea, and you think about building it. And literally, I came back from my trip thinking, I'm going to build a nice lifestyle business. I'm just going to focus on something small this time. And then it just grows, and you start to see more and more opportunity. And I think that's part of the attraction. So I think you've got to love the build piece. I certainly admire people that are passionate about doing good for the world and saving the world in a way that's meaningful in a much broader sense. For me, maybe it's a bit selfish, but I like the build stage. I like surrounding myself with a bunch of people that also want to build and create something great. And yeah, I think that's the driver.
I'd love to ask you a question
Yeah.
that I often get asked, especially since you've done a startup in San Francisco. Can one build big startups in Vancouver?
Can one build big startups in Vancouver? So you know my answer to that, Alex. Yes, right? Like the number of times I've had the opportunity to move to the Valley and I've stayed here, and why I'm pumped, frankly, for things like Tech Vancouver to try and build the ecosystem. It's I think it's entirely possible. However, I do think you need a little bit of Valley pixie dust, right? So that comes back to thinking bigger. That comes back to saying it's, and I hate to pick on BC Hydro, but it's not BC Hydro, it's Verizon. How do you get bigger? How do you think bigger? And when you go down and spend some time in SF or in the Valley at all, you're surrounded by a lot of people that are big thinkers. So a funny side story, everybody knows Solar City here? Okay, so the guy who founded Solar City is Elon Musk's cousin. He worked for me at my first company at Columbus Group. His name's Peter Rive. And it was really interesting going down to SF and talking to him about my latest business, because sitting across from him as he had just sold to Tesla and asking him about what he wanted to do, I suddenly realized I was thinking super small. Like, he's like, well, I'm thinking whatever I do next, it's going to have an impact on a billion people. So something around Africa maybe that would be clean water, and you're just sitting there going, wow, it's like a whole nother level, and it's inspiring. And I think if you can go down there and get that inspiration and bring that back, your mind opens up. So it's important to have events like this where we can all share some of the experiences, some of the learnings you can bring back to your own company, and then actually think it's worth spending some time down there. You can get on a plane, you don't have to move, get on a plane and go down there. In my VC pitch, where for Klue, I had a slide saying, why Canada? And I had to actually tell the VCs why it was so awesome. And we did end up raising from a VC in Canada, but for the Valley folks, it was why. And actually, a lot of them stopped me and said, you don't need to explain that anymore. We buy it. It's super hard to capture talent in the Valley. And if we can help leverage and create the network there, but you can bake it in Canada, fantastic. Center it there. We don't need you to move, which was new. That's really only in the past 5 years that I've heard that. Before that, it was, when are you moving here? And now it's great, set it up in Canada. Might have an office in the Valley at some point, but keep it HQ'd in Canada. So I'm unequivocally, yes, we can build a phenomenal ecosystem and breakout companies here in Vancouver and Canada. Okay.
Great answer. Last question? Yeah, of course.
Thanks. You mentioned earlier when you were talking about sales how it's the great sales team that sometimes drives the product more than the product itself. And you mentioned cold calling. As someone who spends a lot of my day cold calling and selling, is there one piece of advice that you found really worked for you when you were cold calling, or one piece of advice that you'd give to someone trying to be starting in sales?
Yeah, that's so the advice, frankly, is no shortcuts. Like it's you got to expect rejection. You got to expect that nobody wants to hear from you, and you've got to walk in and try and capture their attention in a genuine, authentic way. Everyone in here has gotten that phone call where it's like, hi, how are you today? And you're like, oh God, how do I get off this phone, right? So everyone knows it. And so when you've done it, you actually like, all right, give me your pitch. What do you got, right? And you give them a chance. And the people that actually make it past that first test are people that know their stuff about their product. They're genuine and authentic about why they're connecting with you. They don't call you James if your name is Jason. Like they know a couple things about you, right? And that's the difference. So I think it's a little bit of personalization, a little bit of understanding your market or who you're talking to, understanding your product really well, and then flat out perseverance. Pick yourself up off the ground, do it again. Yeah.
Or use Klue. Sorry, I had to.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Jason. A warm round of applause.